Hi, and welcome to the Blurry Turtle Podcast. Today's sponsor is the Moon, who teaches us that Earth is pretty good, but maybe hanging back and keeping your distance is a good plan too. A pretty crazy first couple days. I'm entertained. Pretty sure you are also. I'll just run through the draw. I'm using ESPN app today because Flash Score doesn't show you the scores unless you expand the app. I checked out the Wimbledon app. Same thing, little tricky to navigate. So just gonna run through this here. Pretty straightforward win for Sinner. Not a huge challenge with Vukic in the second round. Vukic has a big serve, but it really takes a complete game to beat Sinner right now. So should be Sinner in 3 there. Martinez with a bit of an upset there. It's that spot where, the underdog is better on the surface, but the tour level is really high, and Martinez is a guy who is, a top-level player and a bottom-level player from week to week. So, it's just about tenacity and footwork with him, and it looks like he's playing well this week. Navone has to be favored because he beat Chapo, but Dennis beats himself. He spent a lot of the season complaining to his box, making the same unforced errors. Until you take the blame, on your own, you're not going to improve that much. You're just going to keep blasting away and getting frustrated. And the more times that happens, the more times guys on tour just dig in against you. You really want to dissuade people from trying to win every point. You want people to feel like they have to go for their own shots, but at this point, everyone is just looking to outlast Dennis. So I think Martinez can beat Navone. They played twice before, and Martinez won both in third sets. So just because he's not the best on grass on paper, neither is Navone. So this probably goes to 4 or 5 sets. I kind of like Martinez's side. I didn't catch a ton of the Chapo match, but I think Martinez serves a little bit better. Dimitrov and Mutet is a tough match. Mutet was pretty clinical in the first round. He barely even had time to get frustrated. Komisana looked off. He was having trouble with the bounces. He missed on his backhand a lot. He was hitting his backhand very flat and just hard to keep it in the court if you're not judging the ball right on grass. Dimitrov, it's one of his first completed matches in a while. Nishioka is not really much of a challenge at this point. I think Mutet should win. Mutet actually has won their previous meetings, but they were in 2021, so this is a pretty isolated match. Based on, activity, what we've seen coming in, Mutet should win. It's actually might be Mute. I don't know. No one's ever going to correct me, so I'll just wait till I meet Corentin and he yells at me. Offner got a good result. Unfortunate way to get it. Medjedovic slipped in the first set tiebreak and hurt his ankle. So that's an unfortunate injury, and hopefully he'll be back soon. Tommy Paul, he looked good first round. He looked motivated. He hit the ball well. He returned serve. Johannes Monday was really crushing his forehand, and it didn't really matter. So I think the same thing is going to be true here. Offner is going to hit the ball hard and serve well, but Tommy Paul's defense is a little too good, and he always brings the same level offense as any opponent he's up against. So I like Tommy's side there. Shelton, another guy who had a tough matchup, managed to win in straight sets. He gets another very winnable match against another Aussie, Rinky Hijikata. Goffin just wasn't ready to play. He's starting to look closer and closer to retirement with these results. He's not very active, and if the times you use your wild card or your protected ranking, to get into a major don't work out, it's hard to keep grinding. I think a lot of guys this week who've lost have just kind of expressed being burnt out, and that's partially excuses, but it's also kind of true. Tennis is a grind, and it's hard to grind when you're not getting the kind of results that keep you going. Winning a first round and losing a first round and winning a first round and losing a first, it just gets as tedious as the sentence that I'm using right now. Monfils, Guy Lamont, great win. anytime French players play, it's kind of almost a given that they end up in a deciding set. And, Humbert just wasn't able to score on him. It's always a tough equation with Monfils. Him and Fucsovics, I think they've played before. Monfils has won, most of the. I'm not going to show you the head-to-head data, but I did look it up before, so I have it in a note file here. They played before. Monfils has won most of their meetings. I'd love to say that Fucsovics' result against Kovacevic was bad, but Alex played fairly well. He hit his backhand well, and I think Martin could have closed it out in 4 if he had just been a little more aggressive. That probably will be his undoing, though, against Monfils. It's easy to say 5 sets, Monfils will be tired, but the guy has a habit of doubling over between points after he loses, but when he wins the point, it looks fine. So I don't expect him to gas out in just 1 round. I think he'll probably outlast Martin just because he has a slightly better backhand, bigger forehand, just more tools at his disposal, I think, and more likelihood of getting the crowd to back him. Nakashima Bu is suspended. I think Nakashima's up 1 set, like 2 sets to 1. Him and Opelka should be good. I won't go into it. Sonego, just too much aggression for Faria today. It looked like Faria was feeling it a bit. In second and third sets, he really was wincing in pain a bit, kind of flexing his legs as if they were starting to cramp. So I guess the run through qualifying, was a bit tough for him. Basilashvili with a big upset. One of, I think 11 seeds dropped today. So pretty crazy result even for grass. Musetti just didn't look great out there. He said he had a stomach virus last week. So very possible that he just wasn't really at his best physically. That sort of illness can actually just make you weak. You go out there and you feel fine, but you just, you're not able to hit the ball. And Basel has a powerful offense, so that's on me for not really doing research. But I don't think Musetti said anything about the virus last week. I do like Sonego in that matchup. He's won it before. No, they haven't played, actually. Sorry. But what I really liked from Sonego in round 1 was he just never stopped going for shots, and his backhand was pretty solid. He has a better serve than Basel. I don't think either player is going to have an easy time if the other player has time. It's not the kind of match where you're going to see a lot of great gets and retrieves and rally extensions. Both guys hit the ball really hard. I think Sonego just moves a little better. Basel was feeling it a bit today with the heat, and even though they're looking at more like 80-degree weather, I think it's just hot out there, and Sonego might be the better athlete there. So I like him in 4 or 5. Draper and Cilic, good for Cilic to get a win. He has been doing well on the challenger level on grass. I don't really know if I like him to beat Draper. I mean, I know I don't. Draper got a forfeit win against Baez, but he was going to clean that up in 3 anyway. While Cilic's offense is on, that'll be a little close. I think if Draper gets ahead in the scoreline, it's really going to be one-sided. He just has better defense at this point. He has more options too. Even if it turns into a slugfest or a serve fest, Draper can do that for longer than Cilic at this point. It's not just about physicality either. I feel like he's just a little more consistent with his production. And he'll have the home crowd. So I think Draper wins that in 3 or 4. McCabe couldn't catch up to the pace today. Morozan served really well, hit the ball hard. McCabe just couldn't keep the ball in the. A lot of backhands just went long. He was late on returns. Sent the ball long. It was a little hard to watch, but he had a good result. He's in a major. There's prize money there. And he had a good showing. So, it's good for him to know too. When you come out of a match and you lost a close one, you're incentivized to train, but if you lost a tough match and you know exactly what the problem was, it's easier to make those improvements. Munar with one of the biggest results. Bublik was pretty salty after the match. He made some comments. He was surprised that a guy with only a few grass wins was quote-unquote moving like Djokovic. Bublik did serve for the match, so he could have won, but once he got broken, he just kind of folded up. I think these guys should be careful with the comments because I have a problem with commentators sometimes because they'll make comments that tell me they don't really follow the tour. And I think if you're following the tour right now, and your team is also, you would know that Munar has made some great improvements on fast court surfaces. He's had some good matches against surf bots in the past on hard court. Maybe you could write those off because it's easier to hold against a taller player, but it's pretty clear that he's been working on that aspect of his game. So, if you're overlooking him here, if you're expecting it to be very easy, it's a bit ignorant because the number one thing Munar is looking to be is a difficult defeat. He really wants to make things frustrating for his opponent. He has a good attitude about that. Morozhan, I think, has the same chances as Bublik. It's going to be all about percentages, really, for him. Munar can probably outlast him. I don't think it'll happen early. I think early on, Morozhan's serve and forehand are just a little bit too fast on grass. He looked very composed today, but again, Munar's going to put, twice as many returns in play as McCabe did, and, he's able to hold serve. He's able to create pressure, and he just grinded through a player who on paper is a little bit better than Morozhan. So I think Munar can probably win another one in 5. Zhukayev was not really at his best today, but that ability of Cavalli to just put extra balls in play and drag people into rallies is big. When you play a server, you almost don't want to end a rally quickly. When you get in one, you're almost better off just making it clear that they have to come up with something just because they don't want to play long points. And I feel like Zhukayev today was a little bit impatient, and, it cost him. He could have won the second set. He did have a set point, but, it's easy to say that and ignore that he was down 2 set points before he got to that set point. So, Cavalli's in good form, playing another, big offense in Pennington Jones, but I think he's just a little bit better of a mover. He has a similar level of offense, behind his forehand. So he should win that probably in 3 or 4. Echeverry, I feel like I'm watching a movie about a guy whose thing is being unlucky. He's just having a tough time winning matches, even though he's a pretty good player still. Even towards the end of the match, he hit himself by accident on his leg, casually with his racket. And, yeah, that hurts, but his leg swelled up like with a a mark the size of a golf ball. He's in an unfortunate rut. Great for Pennington Jones to get a win though on tour. He has a chance against Cavalli. It's like a puncher's chance though. He'll have to win every tiebreak he gets to, and he probably needs Cavalli to have a reversion, which it doesn't seem like he's going to have. Zhukayev is good prep for Pennington. I actually think Zhukayev serves the ball a bit harder. So Cavalli in 4 there, probably at most. Mensik and Uron got through fairly easily. I don't really like going to tiebreakers with Ugo Carabelli. He's not that good on grass, and he's had a pretty bad attitude about things recently. So, I expect Mensik to win there. He's been a little more professional, and, I don't want to say Giron doesn't have a backhand. Giron, sorry, but Mensik has a great backhand, and Giron's backhand is one of the worst on tour. Not worst, but it's one of the most generic on tour. He really just hits it cross court. He's a great mover. He has a really flat inside-out forehand. It's going to score, but I just think he's in the Pennington Jones scenario here against Mensik, and Mensik is the Cavalli, so I like Mensik to win that in 3 or 4. This match, de Minaur and Cazaux, probably close in the early going. Nice for Cazaux to close out strong. One of his issues has been stamina. I think that will be a problem with de Minaur. He's powerful enough that when he's serving well, he'll look good. He hits the ball big enough, and grass is tough. De Minaur hasn't been automatic on defense. I think that's the big change post-knee injury last season, is that, you can score on de Minaur at times just driving the ball to his backhand, where in the past he was really good about putting that back in play. Grass gives his game a big up also, though. The inside-out forehand is very flat. De Minaur hits the ball probably the flattest of all the, top guys on tour besides Medvedev. So I think he'll just about outlast Kazo. It's a spot. There's a spot in the women's draw that feels similar to this, Kasatkina and Begu, where, Begu has the power to break down, Kasatkina's defense, but it's hard to do that for a whole match. So I like de Minaur there in about 5 sets. I could be wrong. Maybe he shuts down Kazo. I did see a match between de Minaur and Vertanen where basically if de Minaur can put your serve back in play, you're just kind of cooked as the more offensive reliant player. But I think it'll be pretty close. Holmgren pulled a great upset. Halys looked like he was struggling with the conditions. He looked like he was on a desert island. It just didn't look like the strong guy that generally is out there holding serve efficiently and manufacturing breaks. But credit to Holmgren, he's hitting the serve. He's hitting the serve like his shoulder is made of titanium or something. He's crushing forehands. He's hitting his backhand well. He's really aggressive. Never blinked. For an underdog, for a guy who's been on the Challenger Tour to get on tour and just seize the moment without trouble is a good sign. And, if Holmgren keeps playing like that, he'll make his way on tour soon. Playing Mashak it's a tough matchup because Mashak moves so well. Holmgren had a lot of success today on offense, just hitting big ground strokes to the open court, because Halys doesn't move that well, but Mashak moves a lot better. He's serving well too. It's just a tough matchup. I think it'll be closer than I think they have something like minus 600 for Mashak, and I don't really think, given his physical troubles this year, that makes sense. He's had a bunch of withdrawals. Even if he's playing, you don't know how many rounds, you don't know the wear and tear and the effect it's going to have on him. So I expect, it's generic, I guess, but lazy almost to expect the favorite to win. But I do think he'll win in about 4 or 5 sets. I guess it's lazy to pick 2 amounts of sets also, but I just think it's more important to give useful information than to be very specific and be wrong quite often, because there's minor things in tennis matches that can change the outcomes, change the durations. And if you look at a match, I would say one good way to look at tennis predictions is to kind of forget what you think and think of all the outcomes. Each person in straight sets, each person in 3, each person by a blowout, and think if any of those outcomes would be wildly surprising. A lot of the times they're all on the table, even if both players are good. Kekmanovic with a good win. Mickelson played the 5th set tiebreak kind of bad. He rushed a lot. I understand it. He wasn't winning rallies unless he hit the ball huge. It's tough for him to, measure out how to be aggressive to hide his movement while not going too aggressive when he doesn't have to. If you watch him, it does look like there's points where he could just drive the ball and look for something else, look to get another setup, and he'll just go huge on the return and miss. At the same time, though, Kekmanovic was really efficient, moving him when he had time, when he was inside the baseline. He just hit the ball past Mickelson over and over again. And, he was able to go behind him too, which is really tough for a big guy. A tougher matchup maybe here with De Jong, since De Jong moves well and just had good, return practice against Eubanks. I think Kekmanovic should win again. De Jong really plays behind the serve and a forehand. He served well today, but it wasn't... what's a nice way to say it? It wasn't the toughest matchup, I guess. Eubanks just looked like he couldn't break serve. He just looked like he wasn't going to win rallies, and he mostly hit his forehand inside out for points. His backhand's not really dangerous, although it's very good, and he didn't serve as well as he sometimes can during parts of the match. I think De Jong really just won on maintaining a level more than crushing, his opponent. I think Kekmanovic's backhand is a little more dangerous, has a little more variety. I think he serves about the same too. So I think the experience there will be will be useful for him. I think Kekmanovic can win that. I don't think it'll be straight sets because De Jong, like I said, he's spot serving really well. His tee serve from the deuce side was great. And he knows what he's doing on grass. So, Kekmanovic in another 4 or 5 setter. Djokovic, Evans. Djokovic deserves it, but sometimes it feels like he has a simple draw. Even here, he's the 6th seed, but, getting to play Evans, not easy right now because Evans is in good form, but it feels like it's a gimme. I guess that's a testament to Djokovic's level. When you're that good, a lot of draws just look easy. So I do think Evans will probably win a set. He's the type of player who, even though he knows he might lose this match, he's probably going to try to entertain the crowd anyway. And, Djokovic is in for that sometimes. He'll play a fun point for the crowd. He'll go slice for slice with you just, to hear the oohs and ahs. I'm not saying he doesn't try to win the point, but, he's an entertainer also. And he'll be comfortable here, I think, knowing that in the end he'll probably get the match. So Djokovic in 4 is probably what I'm looking at there. It's a big step up for Evans, but he's having a good month, playing at home and, playing well. Paracard hit a 153 mile per hour serve. It's ridiculous. Go watch the video if you haven't, just to hear the sound. Honestly, the whole match, the sound he was making off his racket was ridiculous. I would say the first set was probably the best set of the tournament. Might have been one of the best sets of the year. Him and Fritz were really going after it, playing well. I'm impressed by Fritz's returning. It's not the most beautiful returning, but he's gotten over that self-consciousness about, how you look and trying to maintain form, and he's just looking to put the ball in play. Honestly, that's what kept him in the match. 4th set, he was down 5-2 in the tiebreaker. Might have been 5-1. I tuned in at 5-2. There was a point where Paracard was in control. Fritz was in bad shape. Paracard really should have ended the point. He did end up hitting an easy pass into the net. But Fritz was just scrambling. He just was in, I'm desperate to win this point and I'll do anything to do it mode. And that can sometimes be the difference. That extra effort, that frantic energy also can put your opponent in that same energy. And that is sort of what happened there, Just a great win for him. And he played solid throughout. This little controversy about Paracard didn't want to finish the match out. There was curfew concerns. They said if you both want to play, you can finish the 5th set tonight. Fritz said he was fine playing. Paracard said, let's do it tomorrow. Fritz complained a little online. I don't think you should do that. It doesn't really give anything but your opponent motivation to want to try to beat you. It might get some of the crowd against you. I think it's pretty obvious whichever player, you don't know the reason why they want to stop. Maybe it's fatigue. Maybe they don't feel like playing. Maybe it's just, you put what if in their mind. If I decide to finish it and then I lose, I'm going to think, oh, I should have just played it tomorrow. So, it could be any number of reasons why Paracard didn't want to finish it. Yeah. Plus, playing when you're rushing, that curfew at Wimbledon is a hard curfew. They're going to stop no matter what. So even if you think you have time, trying to play with that rush in your head is not ideal. I don't know. Great win for Fritz, though. No reward. He has a ridiculously tough draw here. Diallo is, better in the rally than Paracard. Similar serving ability. And just crushed Altmaier. Just was in a rush to do it, too. Just came to net behind constant barrages of offense and slices. And just, he's a great player. And it feels like he's getting better every tournament. So this is a big, this is where I had spoken about mental stamina and, playing that 2-day 5-setter against Paracard. Fritz maintained his level. Now he has to play what's probably going to be a 4-setter at least against Diallo. Fritz could win, I think, on consistency. Diallo he tends to be a little like Raonic. He throws in one real bad service game, every other set. So that'll give Fritz a set or two. From there, I think Fritz's serving's pretty good. This is the kind of match if they were playing at a 250, I would like Diallo. At a major, it gives Fritz a little more time to really benefit from being consistent. I'd say he's a little conservative with his backhand, but in a long match that helps a bit. So I think Fritz can win that in 4 or 5. It's going to be close. I do think Fritz is going to hit a wall at some point. He's playing great. Probably displayed some of the best level of anyone so far this tournament, but it's a tough draw. It's a lot of tennis. I would say that a lot of the players from last week have crashed out already, and that was the main reason they did. They just showed up this week and they looked flat. Conditions are slightly different, and you're satisfied. I'll tell you who's not satisfied. Botic. Yeah, Botic. I think the only time he won against Fokina was on hard court, so not really. I mean, I don't expect him to win here just based on levels. Their matches, were a while back. I just think, Fokina's moving the ball well. He's comfortable. I thought Van de Zandschulp tried to kind of give away, a set or two against Arnaldi, but Arnaldi's having really bad timing issues on grass. He looks tentative. He looks like he wants to make sure he hits the ball in the court. And as much as that's important, it takes away from your aggression. It lets your opponent also, I'll put it this way, when you are trying to think about technique and making sure you don't overdo the shot, you set up so early and you telegraph your shot. And, a pro player is just going to move to it. So against a guy like Botic, who's not really the best mover, that hurts you. Arnaldi's setting up to hit an inside-out forehand, and it's a good shot. But Botic is staying on that side because he sees you setting up for that. You have to think about your technique, but you have to think about your opponent too, and hit the shot that's correct for the situation. And he didn't really do that. Give credit to Botic. He played a lot of offensive forehands. He really, he held his position. He hit some big passes to win the second set tiebreak. He'll do well here. I don't think. Sorry, I just remembered the one time they met before on grass was Fokina beating Botic in 4 at Wimbledon. So that actually is what I'm, expecting to happen again here. Fokina's playing a little better now than he was then. A little more composure. And Botic is struggling a little bit for confidence, so I think Fokina can win this in 4. Ferry and Darderi is a good spot, honestly, for both. I think Arthur Ferry, is a little better here. He beat Popyrin well enough that Popyrin, gave a pretty down press conference. He said he felt numb after the loss. A lot of players were talking about that, that burnout, that numb feeling like they don't feel motivated. And, look who they're losing to. They're losing to guys who have never had the moments that they've had. Those guys are waiting for that moment. When you blink against an underdog or someone new on tour, they're gonna steal it from you, and you have to find some way. I talked about Djokovic maintaining that motivation. Even if he's manufacturing it, it's, if that's what you need, that's what you need to do. I think for Popyrin, sometimes I feel like maybe, some of the team, I'm not behind the scenes. I can't tell you what the team is telling him, but he's not as good as he holds himself. His top level, like he said, when he's training and he's playing his top level, he feels like he'd win this match. And I agree. I don't think he brings his top level that often, though. And I don't think his top level is his level. Rune made a similar comment saying, like, if I play like I usually do, I win that 9 out of 10 against Jari. And it's like, someone needs to tell you that when you play your top level and it's infrequent, that doesn't make it your level. That makes it, just as lucky that day as when you play poorly. It's the same. You're moving off your median, and your median is not as good as you think, So yeah, it's, back to the drawing board for him. He'll have a good hardcourt season. He's better there. I think, if someone makes a lot of unforced errors, I think grass is a bad situation for them, especially when they're aggressive. Popyrin gets a boost on his serve maybe a little, but he doesn't need it. He can ace you on clay. So I don't think grass really helps his game that much. Darderi's outlasting people. He's playing well on grass. Safiullin, master of going to 5 sets at a major. I think Ferry's a little more efficient than Safiullin. I think he moves better on grass. He's more comfortable. He can keep the run going here. I'm probably just going to point to Darderi's backhand as being, a safe target for Ferry. But this just feels like a match where, Ferry's more comfortable. Home crowd should help too. It's not going to rattle Darderi, but, it just gives you the extra energy. Thompson, scary times for Thompson. He really was, he was down 2 sets in a break, had to win the fourth in a tiebreaker. It just wasn't inspiring stuff. Kopriva was serving well, but, it felt more like Thompson was just not really doing a lot. He was challenging Kopriva to hit shots, but, if the other guy's hitting the shots, you have to adjust something. Really just won that on kind of a bit of luck and stamina there. So, it's a good spot for Bonzi, who I had completely written off, and then he played, the best tennis he possibly could. Medvedev had some vaguely complainty quotes about Bonzi, saying last match he saw him play, he couldn't hit the court, and now he's, playing the best tennis of his life. It's another slightly ignorant take. No one's going to sound perfectly brilliant after a loss. No one's going to offer up great perspective while they're, miserable. And it's totally fair to say that Bonzi has been terrible and just randomly played great, but that is kind of the nature of the tour. You don't see a ton of turnover in the top 100, even though guys will have terrible stretches. Used to see Benoit Paire lose first round for, 2-3 months, and then he'd win a title. You're seeing Struff go through a terrible, terrible patch here, and, then he wins a round at Wimbledon against a good opponent. So it's just hard to keep these guys playing poorly. Like, if you went out and you tried to play poorly for a whole season, you still probably couldn't. The level is just there. Bonzi has a great backhand, serves well. I think Medvedev and his team would want to point out that, he has a wide range of play. He's a guy who can lose on the Challenger Tour, and then when you see him winning or making a finals, he's not missing a ball. So you need to know that level is there, and you need to, accept it when it's there. I think that's one of the things that hurts some players early on tour. Fritz and Tiafoe were two guys that used to, say, can you believe this to their box about the level their opponent would bring sometimes? And it's like, yeah, I agree with you that it's unfortunate when you're, when the weak player plays great against you, but you need to accept that that's the level they're at and try to beat them, Medvedev looked a little rough against the heat also. That's something he's struggled with. And, that is useful to check the weather forecast before tournaments. I'd see rain tomorrow, rain Thursday, Friday. But, it looks like the weather's going to be a little cooler. So maybe that won't be as big of a thing. This match, I think Bonzi just needs to isolate Thompson's backhand. It's flat and defensive, which is useful on grass, but it's not really dangerous. So I think Bonzi should win again. Maybe 4 or 5 sets. It's hard to blank Thompson. Also, I think there's a trend on tour where, guys squeak by in the first round and you think they're just going to crash out, and then they feel a bit freer so they can play better. Once the match gets tight, once you're down 2 sets, you really do just grind. But once you get out of that, you can kind of open up your game a little bit. So I think Thompson will play a little better, and Bonzi will probably win a close match just by being a little more offensively capable. Borges and Harris is one I'd love to skip. Harris is serving great, huge offense, trading well, and Borges is a guy who, succumbs to that and then grinds you down by the end. So, it's Harris in 4 if he can really maintain his level, and Borges can't get in there. But if Borges is able to, wear him down and keep him in rallies, he probably wins in 5. It's just hard to pick. It's hard to pick Borges because he, all of his wins seem to be that kind of win. It seems like he's just waiting to finally get the other person's level to drop, and that's sometimes a bad plan, on grass. I'd rate the Cerundolo win but Cerundolo kind of gave up after the third set. You know, looked like he was kind of folding midway through the third set. Didn't really play a lot leading into the tournament. And Cerundolo is a guy who can give less than his best effort at times. You know, if he's missing, he'll just keep going for shots and gesturing at the net, even though the net is not really doing anything except existing. But I probably would agree too if I hit the net. You know, a little how dare you? Why would you exist when I don't want you to? Mochizuki had a great result. I say that because he probably should have lost the match. He was really out of it at times, faced a bunch of break points in the fourth. You know, he was down a break in the fifth. You know, Zeppieri played maybe 2 or 3 bad service games the whole time. You know, he maintained a good level. While it was hot, he was the better player, you know, early in the match. But, you know, the level did go down. I felt like Mochizuki had a hard time keeping the ball in the court. He hits like a really smooth, measured shot. He's trying to place the ball a lot, and it just looked like he was struggling to do that. You know, with the hot conditions, the ball was flying. You know, I don't think he's going to do too well against Kachanov. The accuracy will help because Kachanov will give you balls to hit and balls to work with. But I think Kachanov's weight of shot is going to make it hard for Mochizuki to really do a lot. And he serves, you know, better than Zeppieri. It's not a mystery that he's better than Zeppieri. I think Mochizuki and McDonald are a similar test right now. So I think Kachanov wins in 3. Another huge upset here, sort of. Matuszak, you know, beats Berrettini. Berrettini added in some quotes. It was I don't know if I'm just seeing the quotes more on social media or if there were a lot of troubled people in press. Berrettini said he felt pretty flat after the win, said he felt like he wasn't sure why he's doing it. It's hard to find the motivation, and, you know, very fair for a guy whose career has gone in a different direction. You know, he used to be that right after Djokovic and Nadal guy who's, you know, always in the quarterfinals, playing one of the big 3, you know, not beating them ever, but, you know, competing well, taking a set every time, you know, on TV, everybody loves you. And you know, we do love him. We love all these players, but not you, Zverev. But, you know, to come back from injury so many times starts to be a grind. You're not going to play as well. You're not going to play as sharp. I did think Berrettini looked a little fatigued at times. I thought he went for shots. He didn't, you know, he didn't really need to. You know, the announcers made some good points about Matuszak. If he got his first serve percentage up, he probably would be able to stay on tour. That's a big problem for him. That could be his undoing against Quinn. I think Matuszak might be a little better on grass at this point than Quinn. But Quinn's serve and forehand are a bigger weapon, I think. You know, more reliable in a big moment. And he has been pretty clutch. So I think he can win that in 5. You know, I'd love to say that Berrettini played his best match, but he just, you know, he did look flat, you know, as advertised. You know, when someone tells you they're not feeling motivated, it's not just an excuse. It's you know, it's good honesty. It is a little dangerous, I think, in press to reveal that. It's going to force people to dig in against you. But, you know, maybe that's what he needs. Maybe he needs that constant challenge to kind of find it again. You know, I know we saw Medvedev jumping for joy after one of his wins earlier this season. And sometimes the universe will give you what you need, even if it feels like it's more hardship. Because, you know, right now Berrettini needs to win matches like this to remember why he enjoys tennis. It's easy for these guys to play, you know, he's on his 21st straight year of, you know, 24/7 tennis. So at some point you are playing so professionally that it becomes more of a business than a joy. You have to find that love for the game again. You know, there's a lot of players, I think, who are missing that a little, you know, whether they're overcoached or the pressure just became too much or they just forgot, you know. I think too much of anything is too much of anything. And, you know, even if you're playing tennis for a living and it sounds great, it's also going to eventually, you know, you're going to get sick of it. You know, if you give me pizza, I'm happy. But if you keep giving me pizza, at some point, I'm like, bro, like, I'm good. So I think Yeah, Berrettini needs some tough matches. He needs to, go win a challenger. Go grind it out somewhere and have a good time. Garin and Rinderknecht. It's one where I do think the upset is likely. I mentioned nobody wants to see Garin get a lucky loser spot, and it was true. Radesh was probably going to make the second round here and play Rinderknecht, which would have been a winnable match for him. They sub out PCB for Garin. He loses in straight sets. Garin is a clay quarter, but you put him on grass and he lands first serves, and landing first serves is really effective because, your opponent can't go as big when your first serve is in. Garin's got a pretty good tee serve. Physicality is, the best part of his game. He can play forever. His legs are not going to get tired. Sometimes out there, he looks like the edibles kicked in a little too hard. He looks, a little like he's staring into the distance and seeing the moon. But, he's a really great player. And I think he can return serve a little better than Zverev. Garin's going to take a closer serve position. He's going to smother a lot. He's more stable in his legs, so he's going to hit passes well. I don't know. I just feel like he's a bit more aggressive, and he'll do the work that I think Zverev doesn't. Zverev is a guy like Ruin who I think is thinking about what his game should look like a lot of the time. And he's hitting the ball hard, but without a plan almost. All the tools are there. At times he puts it together, but take nothing away from Rinderknecht, but Zverev shouldn't be losing that match. Zverev should be winning that in 3 or 4. They're similarly matched. Zverev's a better athlete. He has 10 times as good of a backhand. Yeah, forehand issues, but still, he can hit it well. He can hit it in the court. He can run down most shots. It's self-imposed losses for him at this point, and really at every point. And, it's not something I'm complaining about. I enjoy watching him lose. But, I don't think it's necessary here. I like Garin to win in 4 or 5. Rinderknecht could win, if he brings a high level. Beating Zverev is a lot harder on paper than beating Garin. I just, there is a thing on tour where there's a bit of a letdown after you have a big win. And I think Garin, I said what I think. I like Garin at 5. Jari just beat Lerner TN 3 and 4 in Halle qualifying. So I'm expecting something similar. Lerner did figure out how to play on grass in the last couple weeks. It's good to see. But I don't think he serves big enough to keep Jari from hitting the ball. And, once Jari gets a swing, he's pretty good. I also thought that Ruin did a good job of testing Jari's baselining, and Jari passed the test. There were a lot of points in that third set where Jari was, he was having to hit 4 or 5 solid shots to win. And, that's a key, I think. You really want to force your opponent when it's Jari, to see if he's going to make errors. He didn't make errors. So I think he keeps the run going there. His serve is real big. David and Goliath things do happen. Tien is a master at dragging people out. But nah, I think Jari's offense is legit right now. So Fonseca Brooksby is a good one. Fonseca was really good on serve against Fernley. I think he served like 70% first serves in. Won like 80% of the points. Fernley had a bunch of double faults. Kind of disappointing performance, but I think it's important to note that Fernley, thank you, notifications. I think Fernley has overachieved, really. I don't think anyone expected him to just blast onto tour that easily. He's had a bunch of big wins at 250 level, some good wins at the majors. He has a complete game, but this is a guy who was in the Challengers last season. I said he's a top guy in the Challengers and he might make his way on tour. Now he's on tour and we're expecting him to beat, Joao Fonseca, it's a big ask. I did think he could do it on consistency, but the tricky thing with Fonseca is that, his inconsistency is his demise, but it doesn't have to be there. The shots he's going for, if he's landing them, it's really hard to play him. He played a great set against Fritz at the end of the Eastbourne event, so I guess he's coming in here playing well, and I'm interested to see what he can do with Brooksby. I see Fonseca's favorite here. I kind of would disagree. Brooksby is one of the best grinders on the tour. He's playing really well right now. Played great against Griekspoor, never really gave him a look. Griekspoor had his own spicy quote. He said it was one of the worst matches ever. I want to half agree. I saw him hit a bunch of balls into the net, just really making rough contact. But I think it's a spot like Sabalenka Goff at Roland Garros where you have to give, the opponent credit for that. Goff's defense is forcing, Sabalenka to try to get out of the rallies. She's not even thinking that her opponent can miss. She's trying to force the ball. There was wind issues there. There were wind issues there, sorry. But same thing here. Brooksby, Griekspoor's trying to go for winners because he doesn't want to grind the point out because he thinks Brooksby's not going to miss. And it's true. Jensen is really solid. He has a good attitude about his tennis. And he's going to play hard. Fonseca's losses have been, like I said, to stamina issues and inconsistency. So I think while he's serving well, he's going to beat Brooksby. This feels a bit like, Medvedev played Cilic a couple seasons ago when Cilic was very good still. Cilic was crushing him. Medvedev just stayed the course. And Medvedev really was gambling that eventually, Cilic's level would drop and he could take over. And I think that'll be Brooksby's plan here, is really just to see if he can outlast Fonseca. I don't really know if it's possible. Fonseca's ceiling is very clearly high, but his floor is a bit undefined still. So that I think will be close. If Fonseca can beat Brooksby in 4 sets, that's very impressive. And he can probably make the 3rd or 4th round. Well, that would be the 3rd round, but probably make the 4th round here. Tough to pick up a winner there. If you tell me they're playing, I like Brooksby. I feel like he's more consistent. I feel like Fonseca's offense is great, but Brooksby's going to put the ball back. He's going to put the ball in play, and he's going to grind you down. And yeah, I would take Brooksby there. Hopefully, I'm wrong. I did make a bet with somebody that Fonseca would finish ahead of Mensik in the rankings this season, which is going terribly. So maybe I'm biased. Lehechka playing well. A little surprised he dropped a set to Delian, but Delian does serve really well the first set. Even on clay, he tends to win the first set, big serves and forehands. So not a bad result there. Bellucci with a good win. That should be a good match. Bellucci's, being left-handed helps a bit. He moves the ball well. He's crafty. He goes down the line well. If there's one issue with Lehechka, it's that he tries to go for shots even when he's in bad positions. So, if Bellucci's able to draw him wide, put him in bad spots, I think Lehechka will cough up a few errors. I just think Lehechka's serving well right now. And I think when he's serving well, it's hard to beat him on grass. So I like him in 4 or 5. Norrie Tiafoe's going to be a battle. I would expect them to just trade sets until the 5th. Tiafoe's serving is really good enough that if you give him a break, he's going to win the set. And Cam Norrie's not really defending his serve that well, this season. It's a great win against RBA. RBA is having a better grass season than Tiafoe, but it's Tiafoe at a major. He has more stamina than RBA. RBA is coming off, a long run where, Roberto needs wins. So he's going to grind out those smaller tournaments, even though he might want to save it for a major. Tiafoe can afford to save it for the major. So I think this will be pretty close. Having the home crowd, definitely good. I don't know. It'd be the best win of Norrie's season, I think. I like Tiafoe in 5. I just think he can elevate to the level. It is a little tricky because he can lose focus at times, so he can get ground down, I guess. But yeah, I like him to win. Rublev is actually 3-0 against Harris, so I do think Lloyd's serve and volley is going to be effective. Rublev had a nightmarish time. I tuned into Rublev and Sherry, and they were both miserable, which is kind of funny. I don't want to see them miserable, but just funny to see. Can't even tell who's winning the match by what's going on because they were just struggling to find cheap points. I think the points will be shorter against Harris. I think Harris will need to really, really defend his serve there because his backhand's probably not up to par for that match. So I'd like Rublev to win in 4 or 5. He has a habit of making things tough, Rublev, and being visibly frustrated does encourage your opponent. So that could be a tough one. Mannarino should beat Royer. Tsitsipas had to pull out. I mean, Royer was playing tremendous. Tsitsipas said he has a back issue, though. Floated, possibly retiring. It's a little sad. I like to give him the business when he makes a silly comment, but you don't want to see people dealing with back issues. That's painful. And that's no fun. That'll affect you outside of tennis too. So, I'll give Tsitsipas a break for the foreseeable future. Hopefully he can heal. Royer's serving can definitely put him in the match there. Mannarino is just a little bit better on grass. Don't think that'll be a blowout in either direction. That's one of those where I'd say, would I be surprised if Royer won? Not at all. Same if Mannarino managed to win 3 close sets. Anything's really possible there. They actually haven't played before, which is a bit surprising because they'll have been in a lot of French challenger tournaments indoors where they would both, do well. So kind of close. I like Mannarino there. He can really get his serve wide on the ad side, and it's like free points the whole time for him because his backhand's so sharp cross court. Auger, I think, beats Struff. Struff finally won a match. Mizolic kind of reverted to form. There were a couple points in each set where he just missed shots. Struff is running to the net. Mizolic misses the pass. I think I overestimated his ability to hit passes. Coming off clay, I guess he really ground his way through qualifying with power. Didn't really have to play too many like serve and volley opponents because, he found the net and a bunch of shots I thought he would convert. Kudos to Struff for applying the pressure. Felix has beaten Struff most of the time they've played. So, I think they're very similar, just big serves, big forehands. Felix is a little bit more patient, so I think he'll get that. I think he's a little bit more athletic too, so even though Struff is going to put him in bad spots, I think Felix's quickness will get it there. And 5 sets with Duckworth looks bad on paper maybe, but Duckworth is a good, grass courter, and Felix has something in his contract that he has to go to 5 sets at the first round of every major. Oliver Tarvet. Yeah, I was calling him Tarvet. Apparently it's Tarvet. Just a great win. That kid is very good. He goes to San Diego State University or San Diego University. Well, he goes there. The end. Yeah, so apparently he has to spend most of his prize money and stay under like $7,000. It's like $7,300, or else he forfeits his amateur status. And so he's gonna have a good year. He's got 6 months left to spend $100,000 at least. So that's a good year, man. You're gonna see a lot of him at qualifying tournaments. And I think he'll do well at them. So I wouldn't be surprised. I don't know how he'll do it, but I wouldn't be surprised if he had to forfeit his amateur status by the end of the season. Looking at his game, I could see him qualifying for a lot of hardcourt events. I could see him beating some of the guys, at the 250 level. He's a really solid player. There's no hole in his game there, and there's a lot of composure. He was serving out the match, and he just he just went about his business. Wasn't really a crazy celebration. The kid is good. He seems sensible. I don't know how he's just randomly appeared, but he's very good. Playing Alcaraz is a gift. The Fognini match will give him some hope that he can be effective. He's definitely better than Fognini, I think. I it sounds strange to say when Fognini just played the match of the last 3-4 years for him, but I think Tarvit serves a bit harder. I think he moves a little better. He's a little more patient. All that stuff will probably make Alcaraz take it a bit more seriously. And again, Alcaraz almost losing, it gives his opponents hope in the draw, but when he wins that match, it's kind of like the door is closed. It's like someone has woken him up in a sense, and now he has to take things very seriously. So it could be a tough road for Tarvit here. It's going to be a big challenge for his movement, his endurance, but it's a big moment. It's a good reward. I think he'll probably win a set as good as he plays. If Alcaraz can blank him, that's scary for the rest of the draw. But a bright future ahead for him and a lot of other very positive cliches.